What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and every year fantasy football leagues are won because of breakouts. So much so that last year, 5 of the top 12 running backs in points per game had never even finished in the top 24 before that. They essentially came out of nowhere. So today, we're going to talk about the 6 running backs that are ready to break out in 2024. These are all guys that are yet to have a top 24 point per game season that I think could be RB2s or better in 2024. So with all that being said, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen.
Now, first up, we have Jaylen Warren, who's going at the 805 as the RB24 over on Underdog. As always, if you're new to Underdog Fantasy, they have drafts going on all summer long. Right now, they have the fast puppy and the slow puppy. Each of them $5 to join, and I believe $100,000 to first place in each of those contests. Definitely make sure you check them out. When you do, use promo code RON, and they will match your first deposit up to $250, and you get a bonus pick'em waiting for you in the pick'em lobby. That is all going to be in the description, comment section down below. The link will be there for you guys to check out. It is the perfect way to get ready for your home league. $5 to enter and get a feel for what fantasy drafts look like in 2023. Now, with Jaylen Warren, it's a little bit touchy because we did just mention Najee Harris in a couple of videos ago where I said now is the time to draft Najee Harris, but I think both guys are good values. I don't think you have to have an either-or approach to every single backfield where I have to come on here and push down Najee Harris. I think that they're both good draft picks because it's going to be a run-heavy offense, and we want to target the good environments, and that's what the Steelers are going to be, where we saw last year Miami and Detroit both had top 24 point per game running backs, right? Detroit had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Miami had Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane. It wouldn't shock me if Najee and Warren did the same thing in 2024 for the Steelers because we get Arthur Smith, new play caller, and we can see the top 3 teams in terms of running back usage. This is a chart from Hayden Winks where he took into account carries, targets, red zone opportunities, all of that. How many fantasy points per game expected volume-wise are going to the running backs per team? And, of course, in the top 3, the Dolphins and the Lions. Of course, those are the 2 backfields that had 2 top 24 finishes. Who else was in that top 3 sandwiched between both of them? The Falcons. Now, the Falcons didn't work out. Their offense wasn't great. They had Desmond Ridder, but you bring Arthur Smith to the Steelers, who are already using their running backs a bunch. As you can see here, the Steelers are about in the top 10 in terms of running back usage. Arthur Smith is going to be using them at a rate similar to the Dolphins and the Lions, so there should be enough volume to go around. Now, I know that Arthur Smith has a lot of stink to his name. People are frustrated. He has been a fantasy killer for London, for Pitts, for Bijan Robinson, but when he gets to just focus in and lock in on calling plays and being the coordinator, he's not all that bad. He has 5 years of play calling experience. Both of his years with Tennessee, he was an absolute monster, where he was second in yards, second in touchdowns in 2020, and third in yards and second in rushing touchdowns in 2019. And over his entire 5-year stretch has been top 3 times in terms of rush attempts, has been outside of the top 10 in rush attempts just once. This is going to be a really rush-heavy offense, and it's going to be efficient. And we know it's going to be efficient because his 2 years in Tennessee, he ranked top 5 in rushing efficiency, rush EPA per play, and 1 of his 3 years in Atlanta, he was top 5 in efficiency. We saw that with Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier. The other 2 years, thrown off by quarterback play, thrown off by him having to be a CEO. Again, when he can just lock in and focus on an offense, that's when it's really exciting because we are going to score points, we're going to run the ball a ton, and there's going to be enough meat on the bone for both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. Now, we could see an improved offensive line for the Steelers just to establish the run, where now the Steelers are a top 15-ish offensive line, which is huge. They draft Zach Frazier, they draft Troy Fautanu. They're putting a lot of resources into the offensive line. This is a team that wants to establish the run, wants to run the ball, and we should really like Jaylen Warren in terms of his skill set and what he's shown so far. He is, when we plug him into the utilization report over on Fantasy Life, he has a really good profile where he is the receiving back, and that's what we want in an offense. Where last year, when we look at Jaylen Warren versus Najee Harris, It was about a 50-50 split in terms of snaps, but Jaylen Warren had more routes, more targets, better targets per out run. He was a long down and distance guy. He was a 2-minute drill, and he outproduced Najee Harris in points per game. Now, do I think that's going to happen again this year? I would give the slight edge to Jaylen Warren. I think that they're probably about 50-50 to outscore each other, but I think one of them or both of them are going to be very good in fantasy football this season, where even back then, like last year, Jaylen Warren had 45% of the short down and distance snaps, so he's not a complete zero in short. Again, I think it could be Montgomery Gibbs, where Najee will do the grinder work between the 20s, we'll get the goal line carries, and then Jaylen Warren will be kind of this change of pace, speed back, get the 2-minute drill stuff, get the long down and distance stuff, be the explosive running back there. And again, I think that there's going to be enough to go around for both, especially because Jaylen Warren has been hyper efficient. Last year, we look at yards per carry, EPA per rush, rushing yards over expected. He outproduced Najee Harris in all of it. Now, I will say they're going to a different scheme. I believe it's going to be zone heavy, where under Matt Canada, it was man and gap heavy. That does favor Najee Harris. So I actually think Najee Harris is going to have a bounce back year, and why we're drafting him as well. But I think Jaylen Warren is going to be good too. And then, of course, you have the secret door of if Najee goes down, Jaylen Warren's a top 12 running back. If Jaylen Warren goes down, Najee Harris is a top 12 running back. So this is a guy that's going to be he's going to be probably like a back end RB2 with the upside to be an RB1 if the guy in front of him gets injured. And of course, when we look at the other stats with Jaylen Warren, he's an absolute stud. This is why we're betting on him as well, because John Mack retweeted he was first in missed tackles forced per attempt. Then you had Drew Davenport here. He was third in terms of rushing yards over expected per attempt. So this is a guy that has a lot of juice, lots of efficiency, big plays, catches the ball, and is going to be in an offense that's going to be efficient, run heavy. I think Russell Wilson's going to be a massive upgrade from what Arthur Smith had in Atlanta with Desmond Ridder. So I'm excited for what this run game is going to look like, because, again, we've seen Arthur Smith scheme a good run game in the past. Now, next up, we have Tyjae Spears. He's going to the 1003 as the RB32 right now. Now, I will say a lot of these running backs are middle to late, but we're talking about guys, again, who are yet to finish inside the top 24 running backs in points per game that I think could finish inside the top 24. So it removes a lot of the field, right? But these are guys that are going later on Underdog. They'll probably be in like home leagues where Tyjae Spears is like a 10th round pick. In your home league, he'll probably more like an 8th round pick, but I think that he's an absolute smash there. Now, I do want to say most of these running backs we're going to talk about moving forward after Jaylen Warren are going to be like rookie year running backs, but a lot of them are year two. And you can see here, this is a great article from Ryan Heath where he talked about age curves, age cliffs, all of that. And when we look at running backs, their production over their entire career, usually they see the biggest jump in year two, where the key takeaway from Ryan Heath, he said generally running backs take a big step forward from year 1 to year 2, and then 2 through 6 are your peak years. So year 2 is the year to target for running backs in terms of their breakout year. And Tyjae Spears obviously fits the bill. Now, he is really interesting, where he was drafted last year as a pure handcuff, and he pushed a Derrick Henry into a 50-50 timeshare. Now, Derrick Henry was fine, but Tyjae Spears had better rushing yards over expected, had a better yards per carry, had a better EPA per rush, which, by the way, how am I supposed to say this? Rushing is usually negative EPA, just because it's probably better to pass. Tyjae Spears is one of the rare guys that had a positive EPA per rush, which is really telling. Across the board, just a monster efficiency back, which, again, it's really impressive that he forced Derrick Henry into a 50-50 timeshare. And that's not to say that Derrick Henry was bad or that he was washed last year. It's just Tyjae Spears was that good. Now, this is a really good tweet from Dynasty Zoltan here, where he highlighted Tony Pollard versus Tyjae Spears, because in this Titans offense, we haven't mentioned it yet, but he's going to be splitting work with Tony Pollard. And across the board last year, yards per attempt, yards per touch, yards created per touch, yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced rate, explosive run rate, yards per out run, first down rate. Tyjae Spears across the board killed Tony Pollard last year. And on top of that, a lot of these are in like the 90th plus percentile. He was an absolute monster in terms of efficiency, in terms of big plays, in terms of explosive plays, in terms of pass catching. It was all there for Tyjae Spears in 2023. Now, he comes into this year with a year of continuity that Tony Pollard doesn't have. We do have a new coaching staff, though, with Brian Callahan coming in from the Bengals. So it's going to be a really different look here. And this is actually a blur from Establish the Run from Pat Thorman. He does all their pace work, and it's really good stuff. And he wrote up the Titans. He said, one of the slowest offenses in recent memory is a lock to play faster in 2024. It would be impossible not to when throwing at a clip that's light years beyond what we've come to expect. During Vrabel's 6 years as head coach, the Titans ranked second to last in neutral pass rate, while new head coach Brian Callahan served as the Bengals' offense coordinator over the past 5 years. Cincinnati ranked second in neutral pass rate. Now, certified football guy Vrabel and Derrick Henry are gone, while clock-draining clown Arthur Smith is a distant memory. Enter Callahan, a revamped wide receiver core with Ridley, Boyd, and Hopkins, a more dynamic pass-catching backfield, and improved pass blocking on the offensive line. Even if Will Levis can't stop playing like a drunk Drew Bledsoe, Tennessee's pace is pointed up. After finishing dead last in snaps per game last season, their play volume will surely follow. So they're going to pass the ball more. They're going to run more plays as a whole. And they don't really have, Tony Pollard gets signed, but they don't really have a Derrick Henry, like a between-the-tackles grinder. So the pass-catching role is up for grabs. The between-the-tackles role is up for grabs. Now, I don't think that Tyjae Spears needs to have 20-plus touches per game to be good. He could probably operate in that 15 touches per game and kind of be like Jahmyr Gibbs last year. That's kind of the upside for him, but he's shown the efficiency. The offense is getting better. They're going to pass the ball more. They're going to kind of open things up. That should be lighter boxes. That should as well be more plays in each game where, they're not letting the clock just chew the entire time. And that's good for Tyjae Spears. And on top of that, they invested in the offensive line. They draft J.C. Latham in the top 10. And they bring in Bill Callahan, Brian Callahan's dad, who's like one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. So I think Tyjae Spears, he's going behind Tony Pollard in most fantasy drafts and most ADP right now. I'd probably in a vacuum rank Tyjae Spears ahead because, again, he was more efficient last year. He looked better. He has continuity with the team. The front office drafted him. So he has a ton of juice. And in what's going to be a revamped offense, I do love Tyjae Spears as late as you can draft him right now. Again, he's like a 10th round pick over on Underdog. Now, another player with a similar archetype here is Chase Brown, who's going at the 1103 as the RB37 running back for the Bengals. He's also a second-year player, so he fits with that Ryan Heath chart of a second-year breakout. Now, we have a spot here where we know the Bengals are going to score a lot of points, right? They run a lot of plays, like we just saw with the Callahan blurb. They pass the ball a ton. They run a lot of plays. They score a lot of points. We want running backs in that environment. Now, Zach Moss and Chase Brown, to me, are honestly both fine plays because they're both in good offenses. They're both cheap, right? Zach Moss is like a 9th round pick. Chase Brown is like a 11th. So both of them are fine picks. And again, with the Najee and Warren thing, you don't have to push one down to prop the other up. And I think Jacob Sanderson actually sort of broke this down well in his Jalen Wright blurb from this offseason. Again, this is Jacob Sanderson. He has a Substack called Thinking About Thinking, and he said, every year, there is a backfield where someone gets drafted, and fantasy managers simply do not understand how our game and real-life football teams intersect, and the talking points are extremely bad, leading to some really bad discourse. Last year, that was the Jaguars. After Tank Bigsby was drafted, analysts rushed to create a zero-sum game where one need not exist and line up for Team Travis or Team Tank. I was Team both because A, I'm not under the assumption that I have to bat 1,000 in order to provide helpful advice, and B, the market's reaction to uncertainty created a likelihood that the magnitude of the hit on one player would surpass any value lost on the other player. Essentially, my take was that Travis Etienne was far too talented to just hand Tank Bigsby the work, but if Tank Bigsby could carve out a role, he had the skill set for strong contingent upside. Tank Bigsby was assuredly not good and was a losing pick. However, Etienne had a strong fantasy campaign. So he's pretty much saying you don't have to be 0% Moss, 25% Chase Brown, or 0% Chase Brown, 25% Moss. Sometimes you can just acknowledge both of these players are priced well. I want both of them, just not on the same teams. And that's kind of where I'm at with Zach Moss and Chase Brown right now. And the reason that I do like Chase Brown a ton is because, again, this is a really good environment. When we look at the Vegas projected scoring from Connor Allen here, Cincinnati is 6th in terms of projected total points. And if you want to pour some cold water on the Zach Moss thing, Dwayne McFarland had a really good article. I actually might bring him on to talk about this because it was a great article where he talked about running backs changing teams. And when running backs change teams, there's a worse correlation in terms of stability between rush attempts, PPR points per game, routes, targets. So your role when you change teams is not solidified. So now we have Zach Moss going from the Colts to going to the Bengals. And that's not a insurmountable mountain to climb, right? This is a running back without a 1,000-yard rushing season, without a top 24 finish in terms of points per game. So this isn't some entrenched starter. Now, you could make the case that Joe Mixon had the most rush attempts inside of the 10 last year. Zach Moss is a much bigger back than Chase Brown. And that's really all you have to say, right? If Zach Moss can score 10 or more touchdowns next year, he can be your 2022 Jamal Williams or your 2023 Gus Edwards. That's very much in Zach Moss's range of outcomes, but Chase Brown could carve out a role, be straight up better, and he's super, super explosive behind a revamped offensive line in Cincinnati. Again, this is established to run. They have the Bengals as the 12th best offensive line. Now, when we look at the receiving upside, and again, we want that in a high-scoring offense that passes the ball a ton. There's going to be a lot of passing downs for Chase Brown to be out there for, and we see, looking at last year, Zach Moss, when we look at the Bengals and the Colts running backs, Zach Moss had the worst receiving grade. Chase Brown had the best. Chase Brown had the best elusiveness rating of the group, the best yards per out run, etc. Now, it is a small sample, and you can see he had the worst pass blocking grade. That is the sobering part of Chase Brown, is that he's not a lock to get the passing down work because of the pass blocking woes. Now, we can look at this tweet from Davis Maddock here, and Chase Brown is interesting. He was a bad pass blocker last year, but that was on a small sample. But if we look back at his college career, of that class, of that 2023 class with Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, Achane, all of those guys, he had the second best pass blocking grade on PFF that year, behind just Roschon Johnson with a 65.1. So there is reason to believe that could grow. And this staff has absolutely loved him, where they keep saying that he's like super teachable and he's listening to things and he's really coming along. He's getting a lot of buzz right now. There's another tweet from Davis Maddock, who loves Chase Brown. He said, "It's early, but it sounds like Chase Brown's headed in the right direction." Zach Moss had a 43.9 PFF receiving grade and had 5 drops. Now, the blurb that he's looking at said, "Look out for sophomore running back Chase Brown." He's drawing raves from Burrow and Taylor, Zach Taylor, the head coach, particularly on how he's catching the ball. It's exciting to see a guy that you can just make a small comment and 4 months later it becomes back, and you can tell he's really emphasized it. I think that's everything we knew about Chase. That's everything that we thought we had with Chase, a guy that's going to continue to grow and understand what that role entails as a running back in this league, and the more downs you can put yourself on the field, the better, and he's really worked hard to do that. It's noticeable, and that's a real positive. So that, to me, says that he's teachable, he's coachable, and that the pass blocking can come along to the point where he's not going to be this pass blocking specialist. We don't want him to be for fantasy, but so that he's not a liability, and he can be out there on passing down so he can catch the screens and do the fantasy goodness stuff that we want. Now, the reason I love him is because he has a ton of juice. He actually recorded, despite all of the Miami hysteria last year, he actually recorded the fastest mile per hour track time last year as the only running back to hit over 22 miles per hour last year on like a massive screenplay. And we look at him next to Zach Moss, he by far has the most juice. 4.4 speed, 40-inch vertical, 5'9", 209 pounds, isn't even that small. He looks a lot like a Jerick McKinnon. Like, my comp for him would be what you wanted Vikings Jerick McKinnon to be, and then like the upside of Jerick McKinnon when he was on the Chiefs and he was like a league winner the last 8 weeks of 2022. That's kind of what you're looking at with Chase Brown, a guy who has not just juice, not just passing role, upside, but also a guy that can handle a workload if need be. Ben Gretsch pointed this out, but in college, he had 12 games of 20 or more touches, or 25 or more touches. You can see here, he had a game of like 40 rush attempts, 36 rush attempts, 33. This is not just a satellite back. This is a guy with a ton of juice, a guy that can handle a workload, a guy that can play in all phases. So he has the contingency upside where if Zach Moss was to go down, Chase Brown could just be the all-purpose back. He also has the upside to just be flat out better than Zach Moss. And maybe the more median outcome is that he's just good enough to carve out a role, force a 50-50 split, and kind of be like this year's Jalen Warren. Now, after that, we have Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet is a guy that I liked a lot last year. He didn't really pan out, but nobody really did in that Seahawks offense. So you're getting him pretty much at a discount from where he was last year. At the 1201 is the RB41. And I'm just excited about this new offense, and I want pieces of it because Josh Norris points it out well, but the Seahawks ran the fewest plays per game last year, which is 58.5. Now they get Ryan Grubb from Washington, who utilizes fantastic motion, stacks, and alignments to manufacture space/shots. And we look over the last 2 years at what this Washington offense has been under Grubb. It has been insane. They were, in 2022, top 10 in plays per game, second in total EPA, first in EPA per play. And EPA, again, is just efficiency. A little bit more middle of the pack in terms of plays per game, but 65 plays per game, 69th in the college football landscape when there's like 150 teams. That means we're operating with a efficient passing game and a top half plays per game volume-wise. So that is perfect. That's all we could really want in a modern NFL. And we look at Zach Charbonnet versus his running mate. it was pretty close between him and Kenneth Walker last year. Ian Hartitz outlines it here in terms of yards per carry. Charbonnet had the upper hand, yards over expected per carry. Charbonnet, yards after contact per carry. Charbonnet, missed tackles forced per carry. That was Kenneth Walker. Explosive run rate, Charbonnet. Stuff percentage, he had a lower stuff percentage, which is better than Kenneth Walker. So I'm not saying that he's going to have the role, or the lead role, but when we talk about Kenneth Walker versus Zach Charbonnet, they were both drafted in the second round. And now we have new head coach, right? Pete Carroll's gone, and we have new OC. So, I mean, I don't know why I just like moved my mic like that, but I would give Kenneth Walker, obviously, I would make him the betting favorite to be the lead back, but I wouldn't have it be this like round 5 versus round 12 difference between the two running backs. Again, new regime. Zach Charbonnet was pretty much as good as Kenneth Walker last year. And on top of that, the spot that he was even better at than Kenneth Walker was short yardage stuff. And I think that we might have just been a year early with our Charbonnet love. I loved him last year. He didn't really pan out. He had a couple games here and there. He was fine, but you never could really start him because the Seahawks offense underperformed, low volume offense. It was never all that pretty. But when we talk about short yardage conversion rate, right? This is third and fourth and short from Warren Sharp. Zach Charbonnet is one of the few running backs, or maybe not one of the few, but one of like the 12 running backs that are above 70% in terms of converting those third and fourth and shorts, which is what we thought he was brought in for, right? Kenneth Walker's a home run hitter, but when you 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, when you're on the goal line, Charbonnet is probably the more steady back, which that's what we want in fantasy, right? The biggest drivers of fantasy points for running backs, short yardage goal line work, and reception. So we can see here, last year he was the better short yardage back. Kenneth Walker's not even on this list in terms of 1 to 2 yards to go in short yardage. A lot of the times he was stuffed. And then we look at their usage last year. Kenneth Walker had the better usage profile across the board. That's going to happen when you're talking about a rookie versus like a year 2 guy. But when you talk about they had the same amount of target share, the same amount of target share. Zach Charbonnet had more routes run, and he was the preferred long down and distance and 2-minute drill guy. And that's the huge part. If you can get the 2-minute drill and the long down and distance snaps, and you can get the short yardage area stuff, that is perfect. Like, that is the exact role we want. That is where we can get all of the fantasy points we need. And that is really exciting because, again, last year he was the preferred receiving back. He was better in short yardage. And we know running backs improve in their second year. So there's a lot to look at here where 12th round's an absolute steal. He is not just a handcuff. He is drawing live to make this a real split and even maybe come out ahead as the 1A in this backfield. Now, our 5th player we're going to talk about is an ugly one. This is not your typical sexy breakout running back player, but we're going to talk about Rico Dowdle here. He's going the 1207 as the RB42. And I just want pieces of this Cowboys offense, man. It's just as simple as that. This is a chart from Hayden Winks. In terms of plays per game, in terms of points per game, you look at Mike Clay's projected pace and you look at Vegas's projected points. The Cowboys are insane. They're going to score a ton of points. They're going to run a ton of plays as they always do. And we saw last year, Mike McCarthy uses the running back position. In terms of running back usage, they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were 5th in running back usage. Pollard is gone. All he has to compete with now is Ezekiel Elliott. And I actually think they're both good picks. Again, like I hate to be the cop-out guy of, well, I think they're both good, but they're both outside the top 10 picks. This is an offense, again, that's going to use the running backs. It's going to score a lot of points, have a lot of plays, and they still have a pretty good offensive line. They were ranked 6th on establish the run, the Cowboys' offensive line, despite having 2 rookie starters. I just want running backs in that offense, right? Whoever ends up being the lead back in this offense probably wins leagues. Kind of like, remember how last year you had like Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane both as like 8th, 9th, 10th round picks? To me, that feels a lot like Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott, just in terms of environment, them being in a really good offense but being pushed down because of the uncertainty. And when we look at Dowdle versus Zeke Elliott last year, Pat Thorman points this out, but Dowdle had a better EPA per rush, yards per carry, yards at the contact per attempt, elusiveness rating, breakaway percentage, yards per reception, yards per route, all of that. And despite all that, he's ranked behind Zeke, which I think is fine because Zeke Elliott, he has a ton of a history with the Cowboys, but I think that they only paid him like $2 million for this year, so that's really not a ton of investment. And when we have a guy in Zeke who's now 29 and could just completely fall off a cliff, Dowdle could just kind of be the last man standing in a really good offense as a 12th round pick in fantasy football. So to me, he's a really fun bet in like hero RB, zero RB teams to just kind of maybe take over that lead back role and be like he has. I know it's crazy to say with Rico Dowdle, but he has league winning upside Really, his only downside is if the Cowboys bring in a Kareem Hunt or like, I don't know, like a Leonard Fournette, like any of these guys off the street, they could sign and make things murky. But if they roll with this roster into week 1, Dowdle has legitimate league-winning upside. Again, it's crazy as that sounds. This is just a setup where all he would have to do is be a replacement-level running back, and he could be a top 24 back in this Cowboys offense. Now, after that, we have a rookie, Marshawn Lloyd. He's going to the 1208 as the RB43, the last running back on this list. And he has a lot of juice in an exciting Matt LaFleur offense. Every year in Green Bay, in terms of EPA per play and offensive efficiency, Matt LaFleur has been 7th, 1st, 3rd, 11th, 5th, and over that entire span, 2nd in EPA per play. That's with Aaron Rodgers, that's without Aaron Rodgers, that's with Jordan Love, without Devontae Adams, with Devontae Adams. Just across the board, he has been really good. And I want cheap pieces of this offense. Marshawn Lloyd gives you that, and he gives you a lot of juice and a lot of efficiency. Among all of the running backs drafted on day 1 or 2, or I guess just day 2 this year, Marshawn Lloyd was 3rd in missed tackles forced per touch, and he was 1st in terms of runs of 15 yards or more. He is super explosive, he's super elusive, and he has a lot of juice. It's this guy who is like almost a Doug Martin clone, or he's like a faster Doug Martin. He's 5'8", 220, so we're talking like compact, 4.4 speed, 36-inch vertical. He is compact, he's explosive, he's fast, and that's a really fun element in an offense that is kind of structured around Aaron Jones, who's a similar archetype of like compact, really explosive player. That's what Marshawn Lloyd gives you that I think Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon don't. Now, again, we talk about other running backs in this backfield. I don't think Marshawn Lloyd is just a handcuff. I actually think that he has a chance to carve out a real role and challenge Josh Jacobs for the lead back role. As crazy as that may sound, this is a really good article from Ryan Heath where he looked at points per game versus weighted opportunity difference. So weighted opportunity is your volume, points per game is your output. And when you vastly underperform your volume, you don't just get that volume again. And he showed the next season results of players that had a -2 or worse difference between points per game and weighted opportunities per game. And you can see, outside of Todd Gurley in 2016 and Alvin Kamara in 2022, it is a list to be afraid of, where Carlos Hyde had an awful season afterwards. Fred Jackson, Le'Veon Bell. It's usually the beginning of the end when we see a really inefficient season. And when you switch teams as well, there is no guarantee that you hold that same role. So now we have a year after crazy bad inefficiency for Josh Jacobs. Rarely do we see that same volume or like a good season come after that. And then on top of that, he changes teams, which we see here from Dwayne McFarland. Again, when you change teams, your points per game, your rush attempts, your volume, your role that you expected to have can now change. So he's got lots of nuance, but Saquon, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, etc. won't have all the roles we expect. Now, he's not saying all 4 of those players, but there's a chance, a good chance, that a few of those guys do not have the role we're projecting for fantasy. So that actually coincides with a lot of the guys we're talking about here, right? We're talking about Marshawn Lloyd next to Josh Jacobs. We're talking about Chase Brown next to Zach Moss. We're talking about Tyjae Spears next to Tony Pollard. Across the board, these are kind of the running back rooms we want to be targeting, the ones where players are changing teams. There's ambiguity happening here, and that's what you're seeing for the Packers. And we already have Matt LaFleur on record saying that he loves to use a platoon of running backs, which we know, right? Aaron Jones has been amazing, and we were always looking for more volume during his time in Green Bay with Matt LaFleur. And this is what LaFleur said on Josh Jacobs. I do think he's very capable of being a high-volume feature back where he's getting the bulk of the carries, but we'll see how it plays out. Is what he says there. And then on the running back rotation, typically we like to platoon those guys, whether it's 2 guys or 3 guys. And that was after the NFL draft from the Coach Speak Index. They're actually a great account on Twitter where they really look at what coaches say about players. And LaFleur is already hinting at some kind of committee approach. And when that happens in a good offense, I want one of the cheaper options, especially when we look at the efficiency from last year, from David Zach's yards created over expected per attempt. You can see A.J. Dillon and Josh Jacobs were 2 of the least efficient backs last year in terms of creating yards over expected. When you look at offensive line, stacked box percentage, yards before contact, yards after contact, adjusted for line yards. It adjusts for everything. Both of them were in a pretty brutal spot. And to me, the list checks the smell test because at the top you have Achane, McCaffrey, Kyron, Connor, Jalen Warren, Khalil Herbert, Raheem Mostert, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Bijan, Aaron Jones there. Like that, to me, those were some of the best running backs last year. So the list checks out. Dillon and Jacobs were bad. Jacobs changed his teams. Marshawn Lloyd has juice that neither of those guys have. So it could be wide open for Marshawn Lloyd to be kind of like the Aaron Jones to what A.J. Dillon was with Josh Jacobs, where Marshawn Lloyd is actually the guy to own in this backfield. So those are my 6 favorite breakout running backs. A lot of them are super, super cheap. Guys that I'm taking just stabs at on my teams just to get some upside on the bench or upside in that RB2 spot with Jaylen Warren and Tyjae Spears. As always, if you want, I actually have rankings already done. You can upload straight to Underdog Fantasy. You can find that over on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. And again, if you're new to Underdog, I have the drip on today. Make sure you check them out. Underdog, you can go on there, run up some drafts. They have the puppy already open on there, $5 to get some skin in the game, get accurate ADP where there's not people auto-drafting and bots taking kickers in the second round. You can get practice in for your home leagues and get a shot at big money up top. All you have to do is click the link in the description, in the comment section down below, and you will get there with a deposit match up to $250. As always, appreciate you guys stopping by and watching. I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.